So let's dive in. It was 2 weeks ago that Governor Bob Ferguson signed the supplemental operating budget. And questions remain as to why he ended up vetoing funding in the spending package to combat organized retail theft. Now, this is involving coordinated, at times violent, theft for resale, not just petty shoplifting. And the veto amounted to the governor axing $500,000 in a funding request that was brought by Representative Mari Levitt. She's a Democrat from University Place. And she's been working on this issue for the last few years, kind of to address, costly and dangerous retail crime across the state. Now, the $500,000 was intended to piggyback on a $1 million investment in 2024 to help law enforcement, to help prosecutors, to help businesses to combat organized crime. And the money primarily went to King, Snohomish, and Spokane counties. And more cases were prosecuted as a result. Some eligible offenders were kind of steered into diversion programs, but that funding ran out pretty quickly. That $1 million went from basically January to June of 2025, and then the funding ran out. So they didn't have additional money, especially for prosecutions in King County. There was a January report that came out from the State Department of Commerce that said this program was highly successful. We should do whatever we can, basically, to continue the program and to strengthen our response. Um, it didn't happen. As I mentioned, Governor Ferguson vetoed the $500,000 to kind of piggyback on the success of that program. We still don't know really why. He gave us a bit of an answer, saying that his office has done what they can. They created a task force, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Um, but he said, this is a tough budget year. We had to make cuts. A lot of agencies had to make cuts, and it just wasn't there this year. That is not sitting well with the state representative, Mari Levitt, who has championed for this funding to be included. And she told me in a conversation that we had this morning that she was shocked, really, just found out the night before that the program was going to be cut. She got a call from the governor's office and said it's not going to be included in there. Didn't get much of an explanation as to why. But she then quickly called the Washington Retail Association, called the King County Prosecutor's Office and other stakeholders and said, guys, we got a matter of hours. Governor's going to sign this budget tomorrow, and our program is vetoed. And so those groups quickly rallied and sent a letter to Governor Bob Ferguson saying, please don't do this.
I knew the governor's office had received them at that point that morning, and was still hopeful that the governor would reconsider. The decision was made, is what it was conveyed to me, but I was trying to get that decision because the money was already budgeted. We passed the budget and the money was in there. So it's not as if those dollars needed to be cut to balance the budget. But in the end, all of that was for naught. I don't think the juice was worth the squeeze, because it's very clear that many people are unsatisfied with the decision that the governor made, and the governor made it anyway, in spite of all of those efforts to convey why it's different, why it's important, how effective it was. And without these dollars, the work's not going to happen. And so that's where we landed. But I think it's been proven that I was right, that this is a bipartisan concern across our state. It has nothing to do with politics, but it has everything to do with keeping our community safe. And now we're without those dollars to help local jurisdictions. And I don't have $500,000 to write a check, or I would. To these entities who are doing good work. But I'm coming back next session. I look forward to working with the governor's office on this matter, and certainly I'm exploring a veto override option as well. So working to see if there's a way to override the veto. I'm going to find that path forward, and hoping that we can do that once session starts. But that's months away. And in the meanwhile, if we are able to do that, and I'm confident we'd get support in the legislature to do so in a bipartisan way. But those are months we're losing that we could have been doing good work in the community to keep people safe.
Now, Governor Ferguson was pressed by reporters on the day he signed the supplemental operating budget as to why the veto. It's $500,000 in the grand scheme of things, and it's a pilot program that's been showing great success. Why veto this at the last minute? Didn't give a lot of clarity on that, simply to say that he said, as Attorney General, he created this task force that tackles the issue of retail theft. And then he says, we've got to balance the budget. So he did, I'll show you this, create a special unit that targets high uh, dollar organized crime. And in June of 2022, you see this release where he announced the task force. And he said they were going to focus on sophisticated, organized crime rings that account for almost 70 billion in retail losses across the country. So his response, I guess, to cutting this was to say the office under my creation as Attorney General is already tackling this. We don't want to be redundant, not needing this duplicative other response. Other folks don't see it quite the same. And Representative Levitt told me she's yet to have a personal conversation with the governor since that veto, but she's not giving up the battle. In fact, she's considering an effort, she said, to try and convince other lawmakers. I'm sure she'll be working with some of her colleagues on the Democratic side during the interim to convince them to come back this next session and override the veto. But she regrets there's really nothing that can be done for the remainder of this year. And then the perspective from the Washington Retail Association is really fascinating. I had a conversation with Crystal Leatherman. Now, she is the director of policy and government affairs for the Washington Retail Association. She told me their members and those members' employees are the ones on the front lines dealing with this every single day. It's the guy behind the counter at the 7-Eleven. It's your Safeway checker that you've known for 20 years. These are the people that are dealing with this increasingly violent organized crime theft ring on a daily basis. This is not a homeless person grabbing a sandwich out of the deli.
Unfortunately, according to different studies and reports, Washington is one of the leading, if not the lead state when it comes to these different types of surveys, whether that's small businesses being the most affected by retail theft. Washington State is number one, according to Forbes Business Advisor article. We are one of the leading states. So the National Retail Federation, they release a report every year on retail theft. So their recent report came out October 2025, and Seattle made its way into the top 10 for the first time as state or cities where the violence is increasing with the retail theft experiences. So this is affecting workers, it's affecting customers, members of the community. This is so much more than just businesses experiencing property crime. These are really serious public safety issues.
Now, according to the National Retail Federation's 2025 Impact of Retail Theft report, they said that retailers nationwide lost more than 112 billion, that's with a B, dollars to theft and organized retail crime. That's last year alone. And they saw a sharp increase in repeat offenders and what we were just talking about, violence during these thefts. So, people are being harmed, very real harms. And it's not convenient to go into the grocery store and have to, push the button either that says, I want to get my Tide Pods for doing my laundry and have to wait for someone to come, get that for me and take it up to the check stand. But that's where we're at. And Washington being one of the worst in the nation was a surprise to me. I knew it was bad here because I shop like y'all do, but it is apparently one of the worst places in the entire country for especially organized retail theft. Now, she told me, Leatherman from the Washington Retail Association, Crystal Leatherman, told me that their members are exceedingly frustrated by these repeat offenders, seeing the same people coming around. It's the revolving door that we know we have here in Washington state's justice system. And she said diversion programs work for some, but not for everyone. And they are sick and tired of seeing the same bad actors over and over again. In fact, she painted a picture for me of how this works with some of these organized retail criminal rings. She said there are apartment units that they rent out 2, 3, 4, 5 units in the same apartment, and they're filled with nothing but these stolen goods. And the drug epidemic here in Washington state has fueled this because you have someone who's, very easily manipulated. Hey, I'll give you this much money, or I'll give you these drugs to feed your habit today. In exchange, here's your grocery list to go into, or here's what you need to steal from the Best Buy when you go inside. And in exchange, I can fuel your drug habit. And that is what's happening. And then these apartment units are completely filled with the stolen merchandise. Some of it is resold online. It's as bad as you might imagine.
The frustration where a lot of retailers are experiencing, it's not necessarily the individual who maybe is coming in once in a while who stole a sandwich. It's a crime of need because they're hungry, right? I'm not saying that's okay, but this is something completely different. We unfortunately have an environment that feels very permissive, that if individuals opt for diversion program treatment in lieu of jail time, but then they're also not required, or there's no enforcement mechanism for them to finish these programs. So they're basically getting a free ride. When you have individuals who are getting picked up, who are arrested, after hitting a same store multiple times, they get out of jail, after being held overnight, and then go immediately back to that store to steal again. That's a problem. We have an environment where it's no longer compassion, it's permissiveness, and it's almost complicit in this action, and there's not enough accountability. Like there should, I think that that's something that lawmakers need to look at. What could we do that holds people accountable, again, provides them the options and the ability to access, drug programs, diversion programs. We have so many social safety net programs in the state. Washington's fantastic for that, but it does no good if people aren't actually utilizing those services.
And so here's where you kind of got to figure out the math on all of this. The US Chamber of Commerce estimated that in 2021, so this is about 5 years ago, it's got to be worse today, that our state experienced an estimated $2.7 billion in stolen goods. And as a result, that translates into more than $600 million lost in state and local tax revenue. So the governor cut $500,000 to help local jurisdictions go after some of these big players. And in exchange, we're losing hundreds of millions of dollars in tax collections. So I'm not sure if that math makes sense, but that is where we're at. And I did reach out to the office of Governor Bob Ferguson for additional comments, some explanation as to why this last minute veto was made, what else is at play here, and I did not receive a response.